If your job at a healthcare facility includes disinfecting against viruses, you know prevention is the best medicine. And maintaining healthy spaces starts with a healthy cleaning routine. Grainger's world-class supply chain helps ensure you have the quality products you need when you need them. From disinfectants and cleaning supplies to personal protective equipment, so you can help deliver a clean bill of health. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Sports Card Nation, the hobby is the people. Weekly news and interviews, it's your number one source. Sports Card Nation, the hobby is the people. Sports Card Nation.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to episode 327 of Sports Card Nation. Happy to be back. And got a great guest today. I know we say that every episode, but someone I was looking forward to having on the show to get the women's perspective of the hobby. She's an athlete. I think she's still, I know in college and in high school she was. I think she's still very active. She has a eclectic collection, which we're going to talk about. And we're going to get that women's perspective that I feel is very important in the hobby. And she's a women's sports historian, if you will. Her collection sort of revolves around that as well. But she's a very intelligent lady, and glad to have her on today's episode. Who am I talking about? Miss Cindy Dick, who I know she's been on other pods, and just very knowledgeable and has a great perspective on the hobby. And we're going to share some of her insights and thoughts about kind of current events, hobby history, and that sort of thing. So glad to have her on this week's episode. We're going to take a quick break here, and then we'll be back with Cindy here shortly.
Hobby Hotline is the hobby's only live interactive call-in show. Join some of your favorite hobby personalities every Saturday, 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific, to discuss the hottest hobby topics. If you miss us live, catch us after the fact on all major podcast platforms. Follow us on socials at Hobby Hotline.
Real happy to be joined by my next guest on the Sports Card Shop guest line. She is, women's sports historian, former athlete in her own right, in the process of writing a book. We'll talk about that amongst other things, but happy to have her as part of the Sports Card Nation podcast. Miss Cindy Dick, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you, John. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, now I mentioned, you're an athlete yourself. You played sports. Would that get you, like, was that the kind of what piqued your interest in what you do, being an athlete yourself, or was it even before that?
I mean, it definitely helped. I've always had a love of pictures, though, and I think it was the combination of both. And so when I started finding women's cards, which is totally by accident, it just clicked, and it was this aha moment, and it was like magic. And it's led me down this wonderful hole of history for women's sports that I didn't even know about. So yes, being an athlete definitely helped.
Yep. Do you remember, you talked about like the first time you realized like trading cards existed, especially on the women's side of things. Do you remember that?
Of course.
You share that?
Yeah.
Can you share that moment for you?
I was yard sailing in Harrisonburg, Virginia. And this little kid, this little boy, had this table full of cards, and he points out a Manot Rion card, and he's like, there's a woman there. And this was in the early 1990s, and that just really was intriguing. I wasn't an ice hockey player at all. I didn't even figure skate or anything, but there was something so magical about that. And then I started looking for other cards, and this is before eBay was really a thing. So I would go to card stores and card shows, and I would ask for women's cards, and they'd often kind of like look at me funny and sometimes offer me cheerleaders and coaches' wives and just obscure things. But I slowly built a collection, and I slowly learned where the women's cards were. And then one day I came upon a vintage card, and that one sent like electricity through my body. It was such a neat experience. And I like to say, like, I knew I was onto something, but I didn't know what. And that was, I think it was 1932 Olympic athlete, but I really didn't even know who she was. Anyways, and so slowly I started to define this niche that I'm in now, which is like vintage women's card.
Yeah, and I don't have to tell you this, and I think most people who are familiar with the hobby, and whether it's fair or not, the fact is that they weren't produced in the same vein as their male counterparts. We've seen strides made in that, especially in recent years. And like you said, even in those, when you first started collecting, even going to shops or shows and asking for people just didn't have them. And now I can attest from the shows I either set up at myself as a dealer, or myself with the inventory I carry, or even seeing what my dealer counterparts. It is more prevalent now, and I'm sure social media has been a big boost to that. Do you give credit to social media for that, or you just think more people are starting, the light bulbs are kind of turning on, and people are realizing, like, a female athlete are athletes. They're just female. Like, we need to stop, like, kind of compartmentalizing and that sort of thing. Do you think there's some of those light bulbs are kind of turning on, or what do you attribute it to?
Well, I think it's a slow burn light bulb. I mean, there's definitely people that love women's sports, and they're slowly understanding that they're making cards of them now, more so, that are easier to find. I still, when I talk to people about my collection, and these could be professionals in the women's sports field, be them coaches or advocates, historians, whatever it may be, they don't know that there's cards of women, contemporary or vintage. And that still astounds me. I mean, there's definitely more in the card world. Of course, we're going to see more, but in the kind of, if you will, the general public, the non-hobby people, it's a new thing that they're, speaking very generally here, but that they're learning about. And it's interesting to educate people that way, because they're very fascinated about, especially the vintage cards.
Yeah, and I'm a vintage guy, so I love them. And I'm not just, it just happens to be one of the cards more prevalent on my desk here. So I'll share it. It's actually one of the 1880, the long cut tobacco cards. And this is an unnamed actress. And what's interesting about this card, Cindy, is this is actually from Jefferson Burdick's collection.
Oh, wow.
And so it's from the Met.
Yeah.
There's the back, and he was famous for gluing his cards into his scrapbooks. And you won't be able to see it on with the glare, and just with this camera, don't do it. There's the Met sticker that's actually, or stamp, I should say, not sticker, on the back. And so, not an athlete per se, this is an actress, but it's still nice to see, although there should be more. It's nice to know that even, from the early 1800s, we still had, a young female kid could have, a role model maybe to look at. Although these are tobacco cards, so hopefully they're not smoking to get those. They were just acquired, maybe handed down some other way.
Yeah.
Is there an athlete, a female athlete that stands out to you in terms of that doesn't have any cards and should, like, really, you feel like she's she was a tremendous athlete, but like for some reason no one made a card and like really dropped the ball there?
Yeah, and her name just escaped me, but it's the first African American. It will come back to me, but the first African-American woman that earned a gold medal in the Olympics in 1948. And she was in high jump, and she didn't get her first card until 48 years later in 1996. Wow. And so, sorry for the name escaping me, but it will come back. But yeah, she deserves a card for sure.
Yeah. And it's like you said, it's too bad that, it wasn't made sooner rather than 48 years after the fact. But better late than never, I guess. And I had an author on, and she wrote a book about Tony Stone, which is
Mhm.
the first female professional baseball player who played with the likes of Hank Aaron and Willie
Mhm.
Mays, and
Yeah.
held her own, but faced a lot of uphill battles, not only as being a female athlete playing a male dominated sport, but being African
Yeah.
American on top of that. It's an inspirational story. It's a children's book, but I read it and I knew about Tony Stone prior to the book. But even though the book was a children's book, highly illustrated, I still learned a lot from getting to
Mhm.
read it.
Mhm.
And just a tremendous lady who, even after her baseball career was over, became a coach and was invited to the Hall of Fame for
Wow.
appearances. Has a park named after and that sort of thing.
That's
But a
great.
lot of the things, Cindy, happened sort of like after her career, or a few
Yeah.
things even after
Yeah.
she had passed away. It would have been nice to see some of that stuff happen sooner and
Yeah.
earlier. I don't know. That one of the reasons I asked you that question was because, to my knowledge, I do not believe Tony Stone has a playing day card, and
I've
I'm not
never
even
seen
sure.
one.
Now I'm going to have to check this. I don't even know if she has even an aftermarket
She
card,
does.
if you
She,
will.
she
Okay.
does. It was produced by the Ted Williams Card Company, I think,
Okay.
in
Yep. Yep.
'96. But
Yep. I
Alice
remember.
Coachman, Alice Coachman is who I was thinking of, and I apologize
Okay.
for
There you
not
go. Yep.
for slipping her
So,
name.
yep. So Alice Coachman, Tony Stone,
Yeah.
someone I brought, to my list. It would have been nice to see them have cards, during their active sports and athletic days, that they can enjoy, but I guess better late than never, right? And it helps,
Yeah.
the one thing I loved about the new Tony Stone book was, it's made for kids. So a lot of young boys and girls are going
Hmm.
to read that book and learn about who Tony Stone was. And for girls, it transcends sports, because anyone reading that, her own parents didn't want her to play baseball. She kind of, I don't want to say disobeyed, but she kind of went against their wishes and was persistent. Coaches didn't want to coach her. Other players didn't want her to play, but she didn't take no for an answer. And I think there's more of a life lesson than even just the sports one there
Hmm.
with Tony Stone, and probably in a lot of these female athletes' cases, is pursue your dreams, right? Whatever they may be. If it's to be a female baseball player or a female surgeon or whatever those aspirations are, don't let people tell you can't or no, and continue to chase your dreams. And I think that's important on both sides of male or female, but I think even more so on the female side of things. I know you tend to collect. I've heard you say before, like those active playing day cards of those female athletes. Kind of talk to your collection. How vast is it?
Okay.
How many cards do you have? Do you keep a list like, hey, I still need to acquire this? Do you sort of have like targets that you go for, or is it one of those things where, and there's nothing wrong with either answer, where like I just go in and see what's available, and I don't have that, I want that, or I like that, and it's affordable, and I can acquire it. Like, what's your approach to your own personal collection?
All right, you give me a lot to unpack here, so but it's fun to geek out on this. So I've
Yeah,
been collecting since the early '90s, so
yeah,
30-ish years. Like I said, I was able to kind of, due to resources, my time, my money, focus on a pre-1972 timeframe. So anything as far back as I could find it, and roughly around the time they were competing. So I'll make a few exceptions on that. I mean, it doesn't have to be to the year, but like within the decade. And because that would influence or empower or just inspire the people that could see them during that day. And the saying of, if you can see it, you can be it, holds true in time and memoriam. So as far back as I could find them, pre-1972, and that was because of Title IX in the US, which I think had a global impact on women's sports, and then around the time that they were competing, and then original. So that's my parameters. As I've started on this journey of writing a book, there's certain patterns that come up in this collection. So I own a little bit over 2,000, and I have a database of over 3,000, including those 2,000. And I know there's more. This is the nice mystery of this hobby, is that I'm always finding something I haven't seen. It's just finding something now is fewer and farther between to find that unique, gem. So what I've seen is in patterns is there's a particular 2 decades that there's a peak. And so if you look at it in a graph, it starts like 1887. Was the first competitive athlete, which is Hattie Stewart that I have found, and she was a female boxer. And then it goes up into the 1920s, 1930s, 36, boom, falls. And then it barely, catches back up into 1972. So the peak was 32, 36 Olympic period. And then there's patterns with like what countries produce the most, and that's Germany. And then there's patterns of what sport was represented the most. And surprisingly, it's track and field. So again, this isn't an exclusive collection where I have everything, or I don't know everything, but of a pretty good sampling. It's just interesting. And so as far as like looking today, yes, there is a hit list that I search certain words. And I also just scroll through, like auction sites. And I don't have as much luck going in person, because especially shows, because people are going to sell what they think is going to sell. And this is such an obscure thing that it's not something, they haven't brought much of this in 30 years. And so I spent a lot of foot time talking to people, and occasionally I do find some, but it's mostly online now. And so the online world has definitely brought the world to me, because most of these are printed in other countries. The US is like the 4th largest in the collection, behind Germany and the UK and Sweden, surprisingly.
You are listening to the Sports Card Nation podcast. We'll be right back after this break.
Hi, I'm Isaac Alpert, a longtime card collector and the co-founder of the Penny Sleever. My wife and I started the Penny Sleever with a simple premise in mind: to offer collectors top quality supplies at fair prices. We offer a full range of hobby supplies, and we'll get them to you fast. Whether you're looking for a 260-point magnetic for that oversized patch card, or a slew of semi-rigids for your next PSA submission, the Penny Sleever has you covered. Shop now at thepennysleever.com and use the promo code SCNation to get 10% off your first order. That's SCNation for 10% off at thepennysleever.com. The Penny Sleever. Top quality supplies, fair prices.
We are back.
You mentioned Germany kind of leading the way in women athletes production cards. I mean, what do you attest that to? Just their strong competition during that time period, especially, or something else, or a combination of things?
Well, World War I decimated their population. And so they had to build back their population. And they had the same feeling that a lot of countries did, that for a good part of the 19th century, that sports would hurt the woman's ability for being a mother, for reproduction, etc. But to rebuild this, they slowly adopted this feeling that, or thought that, strong women made strong babies. And so sport and fitness was incorporated. And they also had something called the turn-in system, which was like large group gymnastics, but not like Simone Biles gymnastics. We're talking movement, basically. And it was not always competitive, but they had the same elements that track and field had. So they're competing for people to participate, and as are the track and field clubs. And eventually, as the Olympics, they could participate in the Olympics again because they were banned after the war. It became a show of national pride. And so women were encouraged to participate in sport, and particularly track and field. And that's why we see a lot of German track and field cards, but not all of German athletes. There's a wide variety and a lot of international athletes that are represented.
And then I guess on the other side of that coin, so to speak, you mentioned like the U.S. kind of, finishing fourth in terms of production. You think that's just a microcosm of society in the nation at the time, with some women's suffrage and women's rights and that sort of thing, and women's role, or how their role was perceived to be, like, be a stay-at-home mom and take care of the kids while dad works, and obviously we know that's not how it is today, and nor should it have to be. But do you think that's maybe the reason why we sort of trailed in terms of production with depicting athletes and women on trading cards during this time period?
I mean, likely. There was really strong organized movements to keep women out of competitive sports. And kind of shockingly, it was organized by women. And so a lot of physical education teachers, a lot of just community activists, they didn't want to see women compete in sports. They didn't want to see them particularly go to the Olympics. And this is the early part of the 20th century. And so it was, if it wasn't for the AAU, we probably wouldn't have much in the way of women's sports. And I think this is why, women's sports equity has lagged behind so much over the decades, because it had this really just fervent opposition against not only participation, but competition, getting individual attention. They thought it was going to fall into the pitfalls that, male sports were in at that point: corruption and betting and all of these things that were not feminine in those days. And so, the cards definitely reflect that. You see more cards in the socially acceptable sports like golf, ice skating, figure skating, tennis, and swimming, versus things like track and field. I mean, the fact that Althea Gibson, and we're talking 1950s, she has 0 that I know of American cards. She has 2 cards I know of, and they come out of the UK and Germany, but 0 American cards.
Yeah, and that's, hearing that too. I didn't know that until hearing you say that. There's my first reaction, right, is kind of sad. Here's an American hero, and you have to go to another country's production to see them represented. So it's another country producing a card of an American hero. Just doesn't sound right? And,
there's more cards of her.
Shouldn't be.
Yeah, there's more cards of her today, than were printed then. And it speaks to the racist times. Yeah,
which is unfortunate, and it's too bad that was the case. Growing up as a younger lady, did you collect cards in general, like just like baseball cards? And who was like the first female, athlete that you looked up to or inspired you as you became, an athlete in your own right?
I did have baseball cards. I remember them with my friends. I remember the gum, the smell, the texture of the cards. I had a shoebox worth of baseball cards, and then I sold them, sadly. But the only card I can remember out of the whole slot, which again, this would have been early 70s, was I had a Hank Aaron card, and that one was special. Sad to sell it, but kids, just pass toys on. And my first athlete that really inspired me was hearing about Babe Didrikson, and I also ran track, and I ended up doing hurdles and high jump, and 2 of her 3 Olympic sports. And I didn't realize how arrogant she was at the time, but and lack of sportswomanship, if you will. But I did later, and I understood a little bit about what she went through. But yes, she was definitely my first inspiration, and I chased her card for a long time, the Gaudy Sports King card, and finally was able to acquire it. But she has several cards, and which is fun, but that one's the one that's most well known.
Yeah, and like you said, kind of a little conceited, but listen, when you're that kind of athlete, right? Sometimes that does come with the territory, and you can't argue with the accolades and their prowess. So. There's worse people you could have looked up to, but when we're seeing, you talked about that being like a big card that you acquired. Is there a card? I know we talked a little bit before we went live recording, and is there a card that's kind of at the top of your your want list that for whatever reasons given you grief in terms of acquisition?
She has one in, I think it's called Bravo Builder, which is a German phrase. It's oftentimes in a booklet, where they were pasted in a booklet, and sometimes you see them loose. There's a lot of them loose, but I've only seen hers come up for auction once, and I missed it. And then there is an Althea Gibson card from, it's not really a card, it's more of but people consider it a card. It's a Cadet Suites. It's the transferables, and because people probably stuck it on a window or something, because it's reversed, it's going to be incredibly hard to find. And there's a few others, but yeah, this jumped to my mind.
Now with your collection, will you acquire duplicates, or once you have something, unless you get maybe a better condition one, do you tend to try to just get one or not necessarily?
I'm more of a get one. It would have to be pretty substantially better, and again within a price range I would want to pay, or a graded card if mine's raw. That's the only time I would ever get two. I don't really focus on selling or reselling. It's not my shtick. I am more of a collector, and definitely focusing my resources on this particular, like now pre-1940 phase, because that's where I ended up focusing my book. I figured if I go all the way up to 1972, I will never finish this thing because there is so much history there. And I just picked a time that was like most interesting to me, which was the 20s and 30s. And so I shut it off at 1940s. So those are the ones I'm really looking at more than anything, is the pre-1940s cards.
Now, are you good? Like, I know you said you don't necessarily go to a ton of shows, but if and when you do, and you're looking, at acquiring to add or fill some spots and holes in your collection, do you know, like in your mind, like I don't have that, I do have that, or do you have so much now that you do have to refer to like kind of a spreadsheet or what have you, or are you so good where you can just look and like I don't own that yet?
It's a little bit of both. I have a pretty good, I won't say I have a photographic memory, but I can see, if I haven't seen something before, it jumps right out. It's the ones that, like a lot of these companies, they would use the same image. Photography was pretty rare back then. And so some would reuse images. And so it'll be a different back. And then I have to like check the sheet, like, is that the one I have? But yeah, I do have a database. It has been very helpful. I don't like to buy the same card twice. To me, that's a grand waste of money, and give somebody else the opportunity to enjoy the hobby.
Yeah. Have you found, you're sort of at the forefront of women, especially on the vintage side. Mm-hmm. Have you found like people are using you as a resource? And when I say using you, I mean in a good way, not in a negative connotation, but like, acquiescing to your knowledge and the research that you're doing. Like, hey, this is my favorite athlete. I know about this card, but is there anything else that I don't know of that maybe I should? Are you getting that sort of community kind of aspect to women athletes and collecting of them?
Somewhat. One story that jumps out is I've been working with a woman who is a Canadian female sport historian who was in academia and is now retired. And she was writing something about Annette Kellerman, who was a swimmer. And she asked me about like, what do I have in her cards, and not so much what I know about her, because she's a historian too, but sometimes you see images that you don't see in the public. And then she also looked at some of my other writings, and particularly around the Olympians. And she's like, wow, there's images in there in these cards that I have never seen before. And I think that really speaks volumes about the importance of these cards to have that treasure of, a pictorial history that hasn't been seen before. And if I can segue here, I also, what I love about that is that they don't have this, huge emphasis on graphics that the cards do today, where it's almost the graphics overpower the athlete. And these vintage ones, it's all about the athlete. I mean, they're pretty simple on the graphics, if anything at all, and so they just, what they capture and what they decided to put into print, I think is really just a great way to look at history.
Yeah, and I agree. There's something that, like, I do some modern stuff, as a dealer that sets up, but that's why I lean vintage is because it was more about the person depicted on the card rather than the card itself. And you see these cards, and you can see like where whoever owned the card before, wrote a new team. Maybe they got traded or signed by a new team, and they kind of updated the card or new position, or they, and it was about, like you said, it was about the athlete depicted on the card. And now and I guess, it's modern times and with new technology. Now it's more about the design rather than the player, or at least more about the design than ever before. And there's something to be said about that vintage card where it was that name and that player that was on the card rather than the design, because they were limited in what they could do design-wise.
Right.
So it had to be about the player or the athlete depicted on the card. So that's a great point, and it's a great reason too, right? To really appreciate. They weren't trying to really impress anyone with design. They were just trying to make sure they got athletes and people they wanted represented in these sets. And like you said, here in the States, we probably kind of dropped the ball on our female side of the house on the athletic side, and other countries maybe did a better job than that. But today it's a little bit different. Awesome having Cindy share her insights and knowledge of the women's side of sports and the hobby itself, and she is, as you just found out right there, very knowledgeable, knows her stuff, very fingers on the pulse there. And like she says, she still learns as well. I've always said that, right? No matter how much you know, you always can learn more. So that will continue. And if you're speaking of learning more, if you want to learn more, stay tuned next week for part 2 of our conversation with Cindy and the conclusion of it. So, we're going to hear from our Hobbies of People announcer, some closing thoughts, and we'll wrap up this week's episode.
Time for our Hobby is the People announcer of the week.
This is Mike Summer from the Wax Pack Hero Sports Card Minute. Don't forget, the hobby is the people.
If you'd like to be the Hobby is the People announcer of the week, do a WAV or MP3 file and send it to sportscardnationpc@gmail.com.
Iron Sports Cards is your #1 source for all your PSA and other grading submissions. Their elite status improves turnaround times. Heck, they even provide the card savers. Their chat rooms provide updates on all your submissions. They also offer wax options and single cards to cover all the bases. Check them out on Facebook at Iron Sports Cards Group or on the web at ironsportscards.com, or even give them a call at 1-877-IRON-PSA. Rob's got you covered.
For nearly 50 years, Sports Collectors Digest has been the voice of the hobby, bringing you comprehensive coverage of the sports collectible industry. From industry news, auction results, market analysis, and in-depth stories about collectors and their collections, Sports Collectors Digest has everything you need to know about the hobby. SCD is also your leading source for listings of sports collectible dealers, card shops, card shows, and the latest from the industry's top companies. To check out all the latest news or to subscribe to the hobby's oldest magazine, visit sportscollectorsdigest.com or call 1-800-829-5561.